and welcome to the Essential Property Podcast with your hosts, Paul Samuda and Amanda Woodward. With 45 years of combined experience in the world of property buying, selling, investing and developing, they are here to share with you their knowledge in the Stoke-on-Trent, Newcastle-under-Lyme and Crewe property market. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Essential Property Podcast. Today I am interviewing the wonderful Jessica Leader. As an experienced investor and co-founder of the Surestay Group, Jess talks about investing with a social impact, her passion for developing properties and her vision to provide homes for 50 vulnerable families in the Midlands. Let's check it out. Hi Jess, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. Nice to talk to you.
You're very welcome. I think this podcast episode is overdue and we've managed to align our diaries, which is great. I'm actually thrilled to have you on. For those of you listening that don't know Jess, I'm going to ask Jess to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, but more importantly, where you started and decided to invest in property and what's happened since to bring you to today.
So my name is Jess Leader and today I work a business called Surestay Group, but I have been working in property for 8 years. And yeah, my first HMO purchase was in 2017, in January 2017. So before I worked in property, I was working in corporate marketing and very indoctrinated into corporate lifestyle and corporate ways of working. But I knew that I didn't want to do that forever. I absolutely love my marketing career. I was doing it for 15 or so years. But the last few years, I was really watching women who I really respected and had incredible brains just make choices that meant they either had to get involved in a really cool project or they could choose to be more present for their young families. And I just thought, I don't really want to put myself in a position where I have to make those choices. I'd love to be able to create something for myself where I can choose on my own terms or make sacrifices on my own terms, really, because let's not pretend that we still have to make them. And even if we work for ourselves rather than for somebody else, we still have to make choices and sacrifices, but I just wanted to choose for myself. And I wanted to build something for myself as well. And also the third thing was when I was working in account management, and you are very much at the behest of your clients. So anything they want, whatever, whenever it is, you sort of have to respond. And I was really tired, and probably so were my family and friends, of me not being around in my life when I said I was going to be, because I just had to stop and just be around for what clients needed. So all of that needed to change, really. And I decided to look at different types of business models that I could get involved in, and ended up quite consciously getting into educating myself in property, and that's where it all began, really. There was 3 things came together that were the perfect sort of platform for me starting in property. One of them was I had bought my first home in the lovely Streatham in southwest London, and I had added value to that building by extending the lease and doing some remedial works and improving the decor. And I bought well, and I really enjoyed that process. Secondly, that made me money doing it. And I thought, oh, hang on, I can do something with this. And thirdly, through the different avenues I've been exploring of how I could make money for myself, I found myself in a room that was a seminar talking about property education. And I thought, okay, well, I enjoyed that process. I've got the money to start. So here I am, let's learn. And that's how I started.
Super. And prior to that property purchase in southwest London, had you ever thought that property would be something that you would have taken the step into?
No, and I even worked in that industry in my corporate career for a good stint of my corporate career, a few years. I was working in corporate real estate brokerages. The one was a startup. They're buying and trading portfolios of commercial property. And one was a huge company. I worked for ING Ream, which is now CBRE, Real Estate Investment Management. And I was working in the marketing team there, in the acquisitions team. So, but it still didn't occur to me. And yet I've come full circle.
Fantastic. So you end up in a seminar room, understanding that there's a way to move forward in the property industry.
Yeah.
So what was your next step after that? You said you had some funds available. You thought, right, this is going to be my next step. What did you do next?
I invested quite heavily in some property training, and that got me, I invested in a training through a company that doesn't exist anymore. But in that company, I could choose what type of specialism I wanted to focus on for my property career. So I chose HMOs and flipping and finance, creative finance. And I got a mentor to work with alongside that, who I'm still very much in contact with today. And so I chose those two avenues, and that's what I got to work with. I bought I did my education in 2016 and into 17, and I bought my first HMO in 2017. And from there, I bought my first HMO and built out my HMO portfolio. And then for my personal sort of tax reducing strategy and wealth creation strategy, I've always flipped my own homes. So I've done quite a few residential flips now, adding value to each property, selling on and moving on.
Good. And that's a nice strategy that works very well as you want to move around the country and move homes and try and living in different places as well. And I know you have lived in a few different places. So where are you based and where are your properties based?
Okay, so I have always invested in the Midlands. I'm from the West Midlands, I'm from Shropshire, and I left as soon as I could. But when I was 18, I left, went to uni, and then went in Leeds, and then I went to work in London. I just knew I wanted the next big thing. So I went to London and I was there for 2 or 3 years, which became 12. And then I was tired, so I moved to Brighton, which felt like it still had options and exciting things happening. I moved there and bought there and did my second home sort of value add flip or long-term flip, whatever you want to call it, there, which was my first real creative vision project, really. And lived there for a few years, met my other half, and then we moved back to the Midlands because I'd always invested in the Midlands. I'd started buying HMOs in the Midlands, and every other weekend I was kind of traveling up to the Midlands from the South Coast. And it just got a bit much, and we just said, we both work for ourselves. We can either choose to move us to the Midlands, or we wanted to stop the traveling. So we can either move us to the Midlands, or I can start buying in the South. And because of the purchase prices and the rent to value ratios, I wanted to keep my investing happening in the Midlands. So we moved back to the West Midlands, and we moved to Warwick or to Leamington Spa, same place practically. And we were there for a few years until we had to move here to be near family. Back home to Shrewsbury, sorry. No one knows where here is. I'm back in Shrewsbury where I started.
Right, so you really have come full circle then.
Yeah.
Picked up lots of property on the way, which is great. So your strategy has been obviously to flip for income, but also to build up the portfolio so that effectively acts as your income.
Yeah,
Good stuff. So let's talk
exactly.
about what's happening today, which is very exciting. So you've set up the Shore Stay group. Um,
Yeah.
so tell our listeners a little bit about what that is, the
Yeah.
reason for it, and what it is that you're doing.
Okay, so the motivation for it. So, as I said, I was doing HMOs and residential flips, and I was happy with what I was doing, but I knew that it was starting to lack meaning for me. And when I had started in property, I had this perception that when I've started making enough money, then I can start to put the social impact that I want into my work. I didn't really connect the dots that I didn't need to wait for anything. I could do both at the same time and, create an income for myself and create social impact at the same time. And in sort of Q4 of 2023, I just thought, this isn't floating my boat anymore, just creating there were beautiful homes, and I was really proud to create the HMOs and residential homes I was making. And I was making really, healthy returns for my investors. So it was working, but it just didn't tick the not the moral, the social value for me anymore. And I wanted to add that in. And so I did. So that's what Shore Stay Group does. I partnered with a man who I've known since my initial training back in 2017, and we've been friends for that time. And he brings the social housing side to our business, and I bring the development and investor side to our business. And we formed Shore Stay Group in Q1 last year. And what we do is we create or find blocks of flats, and we develop them to improve their standard or turn them into appropriate homes. And then we rent them out to families coming out of homelessness. That isn't street homelessness. That when you say homelessness, it conjures up an image of, a person that you might see on the streets as you're walking around, but it's not. That only really is part of homelessness. Homelessness is also the people who lose their homes and get put into emergency housing or sofa surf on their friends or family or sometimes strangers' places, or stay in hostels or shelters, they're also homeless just because they're not on the street, they don't have a home, and that's really who we support, particularly people with children. We very much believe that everyone deserves a home in which they feel safe and nurtured, particularly children. So we like to focus on the family side, not just the adults, where we can.
Amazing. And that's such an incredible sort of philosophy to have, because I think I could say that not that many people come from that place when they invest into property, and I know you have a few different kind of philosophies from your business, both on the investment side and on the social side. And most do sit on the investment side. So it's really nourishing to hear you speak about the social impact that you have. So let's talk a little bit about the model. So you're saying you buy buildings or blocks of flats. So what sort of sizes, what sort of areas that you house your mums and toddlers in?
Okay, so what sort of buildings and areas? So we'll start with areas. We work with my business partner, Mark, has a really strong existing relationship with some London boroughs. And so we work with them primarily, and we're building that out now to work with local boroughs in the West Midlands. But we work with them to house the families who they're moving out of London. And so the families who are being rehoused because their benefits no longer can pay the rents that have increased across the country. They just don't match anymore. And so they become homeless because they don't have the ability to pay their rent in London. So the council moves them to a part of the country where their rent is more affordable. So we have chosen places which tick the affordable box that allow them to have a long-term home, but without moving them literally to the arse end of nowhere or the complete opposite end of the country. So for want of a more delicate way of putting it, we've basically drawn an hour and a half radius on the train from London. So that covers at the moment we've started in Birmingham. So we're looking at Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Rugby, Coventry, Nuneaton, those kinds of places. So that the families who live there do have the connection if they want it, that's not unachievable for them to maintain their relations in London. Obviously, it can be very traumatic to move cities, schools, nurseries, jobs, those kind of things. But if you can't afford to live somewhere, you need to move to a place where you can afford to live. That's true of me, that's true of everybody. So yeah, it's a tough but real decision to be faced with. And some people choose not to make it and to stay on someone's sofa. But those are the areas that we create homes in. And the types of buildings that we buy, we've started with existing blocks of flats. So we've bought properties that are from housing associations that have been run as supported living that are not needed. And now we've repurposed them to house people in independent, self-contained flats.
Brilliant.
And so as we look to buy more buildings and scale, the types of buildings which are absolutely perfect for us are existing blocks of flats that need upgrading, or old supported living properties, or offices which can be converted, or mixed-use properties which can be converted. And we're always looking for more that we can do that with. We've got a goal that we want to keep to, and they're the kind of buildings that will help us get there to create more homes. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
And there's a lot of buildings that aren't fit for purpose that are actually housing vulnerable people at the moment that would be great in your hands rather than in their hands.
Yeah.
The quality that you can bring to that sector, which unfortunately does have, not great history, does it, in terms of quality of accommodation?
It doesn't, and it's actually really sad. It's sort of an understanding that if you're creating homes for the private rental sector, they should be this kind of standard up here. And if you're creating homes for social housing or any form of, well, yeah, any form of social housing, supported living housing, social council, then the standard can be much more down here. And I believe, I mean, obviously when you're starting to build out a portfolio, whether you're just starting or you're at scale, it needs to work financially, because otherwise you can't help anyone because your business will crumble. So it needs to stack, but ultimately the people who need the most nourishing environments are the people who've come from the crappy situations. They need the most building up. So they need as much care in their homes as the people who, I mean, my background's HMOs. I used to create beautiful high-end, award-winning HMOs for professionals, and they were, the top of the range Instagram stuff. But I'm not creating these for Instagram, I'm creating them for homes. But they are still much better than the standard that has been typical. And the councils that we work with, the housing inspector, when he came to the block initially to sign it off for us to say, yeah, this is going to work, you should go ahead with this building purchase, he said, oh, you just need, lick of paint, this is my criteria, X, Y, and Z is the criteria. And I just said, I'm not doing that. It's too low. It's not nurturing enough. It's not going to create the homes that we want to create. And as I said, I don't think people who need the most love should get the least. So we created a new standard. And when he's come to sign the building off at the end, he's just said, scrap whatever I said before. This is what we should do now. This is it. This is the new standard. So yeah, it's really sad. It has to work financially, so perhaps don't buy as much as you would, or perhaps do it differently. Or we've recycled and repurposed a lot of the materials in this particular block. But yeah, there's ways of doing it that you can achieve the same feeling for the people who are going to live there, and the feedback from the tenants is very satisfying.
Oh, I bet it is. I bet it is. So let's look at the model that you have. So
Mhm.
you're looking for blocks to convert. What sort of size? Because I
Between
think when you
two,
say blocks, I think sometimes people think it's a block of 100 flats, perhaps.
no, it's not
What's
at
your
all.
sort of optimum size, I guess?
So between 2,500 and 10,000 feet, or in terms of units, in terms of flats, homes, between 6 and 20
Okay, so
units.
20
So
units.
it's not massive, and and you can, driving around any city or town, you'll see huge scale, purpose-built blocks of apartments, but that's not what we're doing for a few reasons. Firstly, we want to spread our risk more than that and not buy, if one building fails and you've put everything into it, then where do you go from there? It's hard to come back from that. So we want to spread our risk. Secondly, we are growing from a place of knowledge. So what we have done before, and we know that works financially, we're kind of tweaking that and building on that. And as we build on that each time, that will grow and evolve, but we, start with what that works. And thirdly, because we have to be conscious of the people who are living there. That we don't have a lot of choice in who comes to the flat. The council do all the vetting, and that's quite risky. But if you're creating a melting pot of 10 families from different countries and cultural backgrounds, that could be easier than doing that times 10. That could be more fractious or have more conflict within the building. We just want everyone to feel comfortable. A, because it's good business sense, it's easier to manage, and B, because we're talking about humans who live in a home. And so on every level, it's not worth scaling. The building, yes, do it lots of times, but not looking at massive buildings. So we're not talking about blocks. It's about 6 to 20 units.
That's a nice size. And if I can ask, how are you financing these buildings? As I know, this sector comes up time and time again as a little bit tricky and a
Yeah.
little bit untraditional. So I'd love to understand a little bit about your financing methods.
Yeah, sure. And it is, and it's a shame it's tricky. I'm pleased that many more lenders are opening up a lot more flexibility with funding, social and supported housing, but that's not our model. So we buy with private finance, so investors' funds, and then we refinance onto those bank lending, back just mortgages. We refinance onto mortgages with lenders who can work with social tenant profiles and contract bases. So we've got some really lovely relationships with investors. Some have worked with me in my previous business as Next Level Living, which is my HMO business. Some have worked with me and carried into SureStay. And we've got some new investors as well with SureStay Group. And they are really enjoying the fact that their money is creating, of course, helping their wealth, but actually they feel good about investing through us because they know that their money is creating homes for people, and they get updated quite regularly on the families who are moving in and their feedback and their feelings and the progress that those families are making, and that they feel great about it. And so do we. It's a really, it's a really good profit with purpose is a really wonderful way to work. I'm really enjoying that side of the change.
That's good. And I can imagine one of your investors just receiving an email with such sort of encouraging feedback for them must be great. And do you find that you have a specific type of investor that's drawn to that? Are they already sort of in that space a little bit in their head that they want to do some sort of good with their investment? Or do you kind of educate them along the way and they end up enjoying and being part of it?
The people who we're working with so far, this is new for them. They are experienced investors, so they understand what it means to invest in property. They have a risk profile. They know what their risk appetite is and if it aligns to property. So they're already comfortable. They might have their own investments and some investment through other property businesses and other things. One of my investors has got some whiskey or some wine and property and this and stocks and shares, and so they've got portfolios of investment, but they don't have the social impact yet. And so then being able to do that is just kind of opening up their portfolio to add in the ESG element of their investing, which is becoming more and more important to investors, just to use their money in that way, not just institutional investors who are becoming more attracted, or it's becoming more compulsory really for them to have an ESG tick box, to be crass about it, in their portfolios, but from on a smaller scale, private investor scale as well. They're just really enjoying having that. Yeah, I don't think any of the investors I've worked with have done this yet. That said, we are now looking, as we scale, we're looking at broadening our investor pool. Everybody has to grow. And we'll take the investors with us, of course, that we already have, and they'll always get priority. But we are looking to align with people now who already have this interest, because they're looking for investments that invest either in the issues that they care about or the areas that they care about geographically or socially. And if we can, directly pair what they're looking for and what we do, then we'll help them and they'll help us, and that'll be brilliant. So we're actively looking for social impact investors at the moment, and as we continue to grow, and we hope that working with us will satisfy their own criteria.
I'm sure it will. And at the end of the podcast, we'll ask you to share with us how investors can get in touch with you to learn a little bit more about Shore Stay Group. Okay, let's look into the future, whether it be towards the end of this year or going into subsequent years. What does the Shore Stay Group look like?
Okay. Our first goal when we started was to house 50 families, and that's still our first goal. And we wanted to do that within 2 years. We're 14 months in, so we've got a lot to do, but that's still our goal. And we always said when we got to 50, we would sort of assess the business and see where we go from there. Mark has always said, oh, Jess doesn't know this, but I want to house 500 families. And he, so because he's done this before without me, and now we do it together, by owning the assets, which he hasn't done that before. So we feel we've got a lot more control. But yeah, we do want to grow. We want to always make sure that we're doing it sensibly. So ideally, wave a magic wand and get whatever business you want. We have a sustainable social impact property development business across the country with division heads in the northeast, the southwest, central that does this. That would be incredible. That's not a 5-year plan, that's long term, but that would be incredible. We just always want to make sure that we're going from goal to goal and assessing the success, shortfallings, wins, losses, adjustments along the way, and just making sure that we're building sound platform each time we grow it and grow it. So that's what we're doing. That's how we're doing it.
And I might put you on the spot on this, yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Would you say your biggest challenge has been to going through perhaps the first development and in this sector, if you could look back, it's pretty challenging. What would you say is the biggest challenge?
Our biggest challenge is finding buildings that stack. That's our biggest challenge. We had quite a lot of challenges with this. We had so many challenges with this building because of the way that we bought it and the requirements of it and all that kind of thing. And we can talk about that if you want. But as a general rule, not being specific to the first block, it's definitely finding buildings that stack. We looked at a building very locally to our existing block a couple of weeks ago, and it was, I'm not exaggerating when I say the ceiling was being held up by a wonky acro prop on a 3-legged stool on a bin bag of clothes. Like the building was falling down. I might have to post that picture, actually. I've never seen anything like it. The building was falling down, and the owner wanted the price that it's worth when it's done up, and that's not uncommon to this sector. But that has been our biggest problem in the speed at which we're able to go. The amount of sites we're analysing versus the amount we're offering on isn't where it needs to be. So that's definitely the biggest challenge. We have had to put in, so I've come from a HMO and residential background, so I'm learning a lot of different assurances and risk mitigations that we need to put into ensure stay that I didn't have to do, or didn't feel like as much of an exposure as it is now. So for example, the tenants can't pay deposits. So how do we make sure that there's a security against the the rooms, the flats. I shouldn't call them rooms, the flats. So if so just things like that, just making sure that we're safeguarding the business has opened up a whole new load of considerations for us. But I would definitely say the buildings. So if anyone listening's got any buildings that we can buy and convert, please do let me know.
There are so many empty, and there
It's
are so
insane.
many people that are looking to repurpose them. I mean,
Yeah.
I was in Stoke-on-Trent today, driving around, and there's basically a steel structure on this particular road that's been there since before COVID, where someone has kind of, they've built out the ground, they put the steel structure up, and now it's basically like a forest in the structure
Oh
because it's
no.
overgrown. And you just think, what's going on there? And I actually did speak to them during COVID, the owners of that. And they're a fund who just wanted top whack for it, and it's literally been sitting there for about 4 or 5
What a
years.
shame. What a
But
shame.
there's so many buildings, but
I know.
there's planning that comes into it, and the councils in general that hopefully with this government, they're promising that we might be able to access these buildings and this planning
Yeah.
process to be a little bit smoother. But I'm not sure your feedback. I haven't had any feedback to suggest that things are changing in that area. Do you know?
No, I don't either. I mean, brilliant to have, it wasn't this government, obviously it was the previous government who put use class E on things, which means we can convert more buildings more with less restriction, supposedly, but the planning departments can't really keep up. So we've got a planning application live on the block of flats, and we've just got a succession of emails from Birmingham Council saying, sorry, the planning department is under X weeks delay. It's X weeks until we can even acknowledge that you've made an application months ago. And we can't refinance until we've got planning, and that slows down the life cycle. So that is also a big issue. So that's a consideration for us in terms of where we buy versus what we want to do there, because we have to factor in the limitations of the departments, that the councils that we're working with. So we might be more ambitious in Coventry than we are in Birmingham because we know the planning department better and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely a restriction. You mentioned before as well about the quality of some of the housing for the sector, and it's really sadly low. It's really low. I mean, I don't know if many people saw it, but early, I think it was back at the beginning of this year actually, IKEA did a campaign with Shelter. Yeah, with Shelter, just checking there in my head. It was about council houses, and it was called, what was it called? The Unhappy Home or something like that. And they created an installation. It was a very, very powerful marketing campaign. They built a giant doll's house in 3 IKEAs. Birmingham was one, and then there were two, like a Watford one and a Manchester one perhaps. And the doll's house, instead of being like a child's beautiful doll's house, was a depiction of a not atypical rundown block of council houses. And it was things like bare mattresses on the floor next to mold with live wires sticking out next to a dripping tap, and really uninhabitable. And there's a lot of council houses that are like that. And it's just, I mean, imagine a whole generation of people. If there's 1 in 11 children in London grow up or live right now in emergency or temporary housing, I should say, if that is the bar for what those children will grow up believing they deserve, we're not giving them the chance before they're entitled to it. So it's got to change. There is something was introduced in 2023, yeah, so 2 years ago, called the Supported Living Oversight. Well, it's called, yeah, it's called the Supported Living Oversight, Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight, actually, which is basically the licensing and standard introduction that happened in the HMO world when licensing came in. It's basically that, but for supported exempt accommodation. And supported exempt accommodation is basically all types of accommodation where the cap on the housing allowance is exempt, so people can pay more to live there because there's extra services. So it's like supported living and, yeah, supported living properties. And it basically is a regular set of regulations that introduce standards for those buildings, which has meant that a lot of businesses, thankfully, are having to improve the standards of property, of homes that they offer. And, opportunities for people in like me who are buying the properties that don't come up to scratch and need improvement, and those businesses aren't going to do the improvements. So yeah, brilliant. If people want to jump on board and do what we're doing and start improving the housing for people in this sector, please do. We want as many people as possible to realise that you can make property and profit and purpose all work together.
And I know in our previous conversations, you said you're very happy you know, for you to shine a spotlight on the whole sector. It's not like you're saying this is my little gig here and I'm going to, you know, profit from this purpose. You actually want as many people to get involved in theory, so across the country we can lift the quality, and I think that's fantastic.
I mean, Mark and I can't solve this on our own.
Yeah.
So yeah, and not in the time that we've got. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And a
Want
lot
to
of the
do that,
poor
right?
quality accommodation, unfortunately, is council owned or housing association, isn't it? I know the
Mm,
regulations come in to try to ensure that the smaller companies are adhering, but it's a lot of the very old legacy stock,
yes.
the housing associations and councils, especially in the south of the country, that is just horrendous. So hopefully they, okay, take their own medicine, I guess, and improve their own stock as well. I'm not so confident on that, but we will see.
Yeah.
We will see.
Yeah. But it's difficult when it's more difficult than it needs to be when everything is operating within an institutionalized system, at least in a business like mine and like the other people who we don't actually know anyone who's doing this quite like us, but people who have businesses like ours, you can just make a change and implement it. It's not easy to do that when you're working in the big institution with justifications to make, and it should be justified if it's public funding that's being used to spend, you know, to fund it, but it's easier for us.
No, absolutely. Look, Jess, this has been enlightening. I've learned a lot on this episode, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot as well. I think we all might go back to our business plans tomorrow and think, right, how can we improve for the better of society?
That would be an amazing outcome of this conversation, Amanda. That'd be
Looking at
amazing.
some of my deals and thinking this is very one-sided here. Maybe we need to share the profit a little. But look, share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you moving forward after the episode.
Okay, sure. So our website is shorestaygroup.co.uk. But Mark and I are both most active on LinkedIn. I am Jessica Leader on LinkedIn, and Mark is Mark Burrows on LinkedIn. And Sure Stay Group's on there as well. We do have a _group Instagram page as well, which you can find us both through. So there's lots of ways to be in touch with us.
Super. Look, it's been a pleasure. We hope to have you back on the podcast maybe in a year or so's time, and you can tell us a little bit more about your progress in this sector.
Yeah, that would be such a great benchmark. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for having me.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if so, please hit subscribe and share with those who you think would enjoy it too. To get in touch with Paul and Amanda directly, please visit their website www.essentialpropertyoptions.co.uk for more information. We look forward to sharing with you on the next episode.